In 1997, 7 students vanished from their boarding school the night before graduation. No ransom, no witnesses, just silence. 25 years later, a former classmate receives a torn yearbook photo and a message scrawled in shaky ink. "We never left. They just erased us." What she uncovers isn't just a forgotten hallway or an abandoned wing. It's a place frozen in time, and one of the 7 is still there. Before we begin, make sure to hit subscribe, because some truths don't stay buried forever. The envelope was plain, unmarked, and damp at the edges from the early morning rain. Ivy Reynolds found it tucked beneath the mat outside her apartment door. No return address, no stamp. Only her name typed in faded ink across the front. She stared at it for a moment before picking it up, her fingers hesitating on the seal. It felt too deliberate, too carefully placed to be casual. Her breath caught in her throat. Not many people remembered her connection to Ashcroft. Fewer still would have reason to send her something about it. Inside, folded twice, was a torn page from the 1997 Ashcroft Boarding School yearbook. A photo had been cut in half. 7 students once stood in a line, but only shadows remained now. The surviving side showed only Ivy and another boy, blurred from an old scan, the faces vaguely familiar. The caption was gone, but someone had scrawled across the margin in uneven, slanted handwriting. "We never left. They just erased us." She sat down slowly, the paper trembling in her hands. It had been 25 years since the farewell ceremony. 25 years since those 7 students vanished. Back then, she hadn't been part of the inner circle. She had been the quiet one, the note-taker, the girl who always had extra pencils and a pair of backup shoelaces in her bag. Her presence at Ashcroft was the result of a scholarship. Theirs was bloodline, legacy, family names etched into brick walls and donor plaques. They had disappeared the night before the final bus ride home. No trace, no goodbye. Just an empty dorm room and 7 untouched beds. Ivy remembered the way the air had felt that morning, thick with confusion and the beginnings of panic. She remembered the headmaster's strained voice, the way staff whispered behind office doors. The school had closed that year, not just shut down for the summer, closed for good. Parents were refunded, teachers quietly reassigned, and no one, not once, ever spoke of Ashcroft again. Until now. She turned the yearbook page over. A single address was handwritten on the back: Ashcroft Boarding School, main entrance gate. Saturday, 3 p.m. Today was Saturday. Ivy looked at the clock on the wall. 12:42 p.m. The rain had stopped. The clouds still hung low, but the sky had begun to break at the edges, soft light filtering through like a memory, returning slowly. She stood without fully realizing it, gathering her coat from the hook near the door. The letter and yearbook page she folded carefully, slipping them into the inside pocket. The school was a 2-hour drive from her apartment in the city, nestled in the wooded hills of North Hollow. The road would be winding, the reception unreliable. She hadn't been back in over 2 decades, but some questions don't age like the rest of life. They fester in silence. They wait in locked boxes. They whisper through ink on torn paper. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Ivy glanced at her reflection in the rear-view mirror. The years had softened her face, but her eyes still carried that quiet, observant light. The kind that listened before it questioned. The kind that saw too much and said too little. This wasn't just about the missing anymore. It was about why they had been forgotten so completely, and who still wanted them hidden. The road to Ashcroft was narrower than she remembered, and quieter. The trees lining the way had grown wild in the years since the school closed, twisting upward in tangled canopies that shut out much of the light. Ivy's tires hummed over cracked pavement as her car wove through the bends, past faded road signs and moss-covered markers that hadn't been touched in decades. Her hands stayed at 10 and 2, but her thoughts drifted backward. She remembered leaving Ashcroft the day after the disappearance. Bags hastily packed, buses loaded in silence, and adults speaking in stiff, half-measured phrases. "An investigation is ongoing," someone had said. "Please refrain from speculation." But even at 13, Ivy had known better. The fear hadn't come from the unknown. It had come from the knowing. Whatever happened, it had happened here. Close. She slowed as the entrance came into view. The wrought iron gate was still there, rusted and weathered but standing tall, its curved lettering just visible through the ivy. Ashcroft Boarding School, Veritas. Disciplina. Silence. A rusted chain hung loosely around the gate. Not locked, just draped. As if someone had wanted to imply closure without enforcing it. Ivy parked on the shoulder, stepped out, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of damp soil and old stone. The place hadn't been touched by redevelopment. No real estate signs, no barriers, just the weight of history thick in the wind. She pushed the gate gently. It creaked, protesting like something long asleep. The path beyond was lined with gravel, mostly swallowed by moss and weeds now. Ivy followed it, her footsteps muffled beneath the overgrowth, until the old school buildings came into view, tall and gray, their windows dark like watching eyes. The main hall stood at the center, ivy curling along its stone exterior like veins. A collapsed swing set rusted behind the east dormitory. The chapel's spire leaned slightly, as though bowed under the burden of time, and there, near the fountain where they had all once gathered, stood a figure. Male, mid-30s, maybe older, a hood over his head. He turned at her approach but didn't move. He held a backpack in one hand and what looked like a worn leather binder in the other. "You came," he said. His voice was careful, level, like someone balancing emotion beneath the surface. Ivy stopped a few feet away, uncertain. "Are you the one who sent the page?" He gave a slow nod. "Yes, my name is Elliot. I was in the same year as you. You probably don't remember me." Ivy narrowed her eyes. The name stirred something faint, a memory, half-formed. Elliot Dawn. A quiet boy, always sketching in the margins of his notebooks. He had transferred in halfway through their second-to-last term, kept mostly to himself, never made trouble. "I remember," she said softly. Elliot knelt by the fountain and laid the binder on the stone rim. "I kept this hidden all these years, my journal from our last term here. I recorded everything, before the disappearance and after. I was one of the few who saw them that final night." Ivy stepped closer, the wind catching strands of her hair as she leaned to look. Inside the binder were yellowed pages, some stained at the corners, others marked with frantic underlining. Names, dates, floor plans. A sketch of a door she didn't recognize, arched, metallic, with numbers etched into its surface. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A door that wasn't on the original plans," Elliot said. "It was in the basement level, beneath the west wing. They called it the atrium. She echoed, confused. "It was built as part of a special project. The school was failing financially, so they made a deal with an outside donor, a powerful one. In exchange for funding, they allowed an experimental program to be installed underneath the school. 7 students were selected, privately, without consent. Not even the faculty knew everything." Ivy stared at him, unsure whether to believe what she was hearing. "Why would anyone do that?" she asked. "They wanted to test something," Elliot said. "To study childhood development in a controlled environment. Isolation, pressure, obedience." His gaze darkened. "They said it would create brilliance." Ivy felt a cold knot form in her stomach. And the 7 who disappeared, they were never taken. They were let inside. He looked away. Some of them went willingly. She took a step back, the old stone beneath her feet slick with moss. "That's not possible. The search teams, the investigations, They never searched the lower levels, Elliot cut in. Not thoroughly. The project had legal shielding, sealed records. They called it a closed wing, under renovation. No one questioned it. Ivy's heart pounded. How do you know all this? Elliot unzipped the backpack and pulled out a single photograph, faded and curled at the edges. It showed the 7 students in a sterile hallway, smiling faintly, standing side by side. A narrow corridor stretched behind them, lit with artificial ceiling panels. Ivy recognized their faces immediately. Rachel, Jonah, Elise, Colin, Tamson, Aaron, May. They were supposed to come back, Elliot said. After a year, but something changed. The program went quiet. The funding dissolved. The school was shut down, and the 7 were left behind. Ivy's voice was tight. You're saying they've been here all this time? I don't know, he admitted, but the atrium still exists. The structure's intact. I checked last week. The door is still there. A pause. Wind whispered through the broken glass of the science hall behind them. Then we need to open it, Ivy said. Elliot hesitated. If they're still alive, they may not want to be found. Ivy's gaze dropped to the photograph in her hands. Then we'll find out why. The west wing of Ashcroft had always felt colder, even during the spring months when the sun touched the courtyards and the cherry trees bloomed along the inner walls. Ivy remembered it as the quietest corridor on campus, lined with unused lockers and empty classrooms that had never reopened after renovations were indefinitely postponed. But standing in it now, with Elliot beside her and silence thick as dust, the place felt abandoned in a deeper way, like a house left in the middle of a sentence. Their footsteps echoed against the tiled floor, the faint crunch of shattered plaster beneath their shoes. Ivy held a flashlight, its beam flickering as it caught on peeling paint, torn paper signs, and forgotten exam schedules still stapled to corkboards. Elliot paused beside a door marked mechanical access. Staff only. This way, he said quietly. He pulled a set of wire cutters from his coat pocket and snipped the rusted chain hanging across the knob. The door groaned open with effort, revealing a narrow stairwell that spiraled downward into darkness. No lights down there, he added. Bring the torch close. They descended slowly, the air growing colder with each step. The flashlight beam swayed against the concrete walls, revealing moisture stains and old wiring that looked long dead. Ivy wrapped her coat tighter around herself, not from the cold, but from the way the silence seemed to settle against her skin. At the bottom of the stairs, Elliot stopped in front of a large steel door recessed into the wall. It was arched, nearly seamless, and bore no visible handle, just a small key slot and an engraved number at the top. B3 ATR 07. This is it, he said. Ivy stepped forward. The door looked far too clean, far too modern for a building that had been abandoned for a quarter century. There was no graffiti, no corrosion, just the faint, sterile smell of metal and something older beneath it. How do we get in? She asked. Elliot reached into his bag and pulled out a small tarnished key. They gave me this, right before the end. He paused, then added, Rachel slipped it to me in the library 2 days before the farewell. She said if anything ever went wrong, to keep it safe. He slid the key into the lock. It clicked, once, and then again, deeper within. The door released with a hiss, not loud, but unmistakably mechanical. As it creaked open, a rush of cold, filtered air spilled out into the stairwell, brushing their faces like something exhaled from the past. Ivy stepped inside first. The hallway beyond was pristine. Too pristine. The floor was tiled with white and gray squares, lit by flickering overhead panels. Walls stretched clean and smooth, lined with doors marked by numbers, not names. It looks like a hospital, Ivy whispered. No windows, no clocks, Just light, Elliot said, his voice low. That was the point. No sense of time, just control. They moved forward, slowly, pausing at each door. Most were locked. One stood slightly ajar. Inside was a room about 10 feet wide, with a single cot, a desk, and a bookshelf containing only a few worn volumes. The desk held a single object, a tape recorder, long since dead, and a journal, its cover cracked. Ivy opened the book carefully. The handwriting was small and deliberate. Day 173. They say we're making progress, but I haven't seen the sun in over 5 months. Aaron got reprimanded today for asking about his parents. I think they took away his speaking hours. May won't stop crying at night, but we pretend not to hear her. That's the rule. If you acknowledge the pain, it multiplies. I dream of stairs, upward stairs, but they're always just out of reach. She closed the journal, her throat tight. This wasn't a school, she said. It was something else. Elliot nodded. A laboratory, disguised as a haven. As they moved farther down the corridor, the hum of electricity grew louder. Ivy counted the doors, 7 in total, each with faint scratches around the edges, as if someone had once tried to claw their way out. At the far end of the hall stood a large observation room. One-way glass stretched across the wall, giving view to a larger common space beyond. A classroom of sorts. Tables, art supplies, murals half-finished and peeling. But no people. Just silence. They left in a hurry, Elliot murmured, running a hand along the glass. Ivy stepped closer. On the inside wall of the room, someone had painted a message in deep red strokes, faded now, but still legible. We were promised brilliance, but they only gave us silence. Below it were 7 names. Ivy's breath caught as she read them. The missing 7. Each one written by a different hand, uneven but defiant. And beneath the names, one final line, added later, in a smaller, almost desperate scrawl. Subject 9 has returned. Ivy turned sharply. Subject 9? Elliot's expression darkened. They only chose 7, he said. But there was an 8th room, one that wasn't always occupied. I thought it was just a decoy, a test. But if someone came back, the lights flickered overhead. Then, a soft sound echoed down the hallway behind them. A door closing. They turned in unison. The entrance to the stairwell, where they had come from, was now shut and locked. Ivy stared at the now closed door, her pulse quickening. The lock's silence was more unnerving than any alarm. No clang of metal, no warning sound. Just sealed. Are you sure it didn't swing shut on its own? She asked, though the question felt hollow. Elliot shook his head. That door has no spring mechanism. I checked it last week. It doesn't move without being pushed. A current of unease passed between them, unspoken but heavy. They turned back into the corridor. The observation room was quiet, still washed in the flickering overhead light. But Ivy's gaze was pulled again to the wall, those 7 names and the haunting phrase beneath. Subject 9 has returned. She moved toward the door beside the one-way glass, the one labeled R09, though unlike the others, it had no visible scratches, no marks of resistance. Was this always here? She asked. No, Elliot said quietly. This was the one they kept sealed, even during the experiment. I thought it was storage, but if someone came back... He let the sentence trail off, and Ivy didn't push for the rest. She reached for the handle. It wasn't locked. The door opened with a quiet sigh, revealing a room that looked both familiar and out of place. Like a child's bedroom carefully reconstructed by someone who'd only seen them in memories. A cot with fresh sheets. A desk arranged too neatly. Shelves filled with books, but none well read. And on the desk, another journal. This one newer. Bound in dark blue leather with a small black ribbon curled around the spine. Ivy stepped forward and picked it up. The name embossed on the front was faded, but visible. Colin Reeves. Her breath caught. Colin was one of the missing, one of the brightest students in their year, quiet but confident. He used to recite obscure facts during history class and draw maps during lunch. She opened the journal carefully. Entry number 1. I returned on May 3rd. The upper floors are still sealed. The world up there has forgotten us. Maybe that's a gift. I'm not here for the world. I'm here for the truth. I dream of the voices. I hear them again in the halls. Not echoes, not ghosts. The others are still here, somewhere, or pieces of them are. Maybe we didn't survive. Not completely. But I did. And I remember everything. Ivy turned the pages, reading in tense silence. They wanted brilliance. They got something else. We changed down here, not all at once, but over time. Some of us withdrew. Others grew angry. I tried to adapt. Elise tried to lead. May painted all day in silence. Jonah stopped speaking completely. Tamson kept trying to escape until they gave her a different room. Rachel, she stopped eating for days. They made us think it was a choice. But it wasn't. We were never in control. I believed in it once. I believed in the project. I thought we were the start of something bold. But the truth is, we were alone. And eventually, we began to turn on each other. Ivy's hands shook slightly as she turned another page. I heard a voice last night. It said my name, but none of us ever used names anymore. She closed the journal slowly, the pages pressing together with a soft, reluctant whisper. This is his, she said aloud. Colin's. He was here again. Recently. Elliot stood near the door, arms crossed, scanning the room as if expecting Colin to step back in at any moment. I thought he might be, Elliot said. I saw someone here last week, just a flash, when I was leaving. A figure down the corridor stepping into the shadows. I couldn't follow. I thought maybe it was my mind, playing tricks. Ivy walked toward the shelves, running her fingers along the edges of the books. Most were untouched, but one sat slightly pulled forward. A copy of Through the Looking Glass. She pulled it out, and behind it, taped to the back panel of the shelf, was a folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it carefully. A map. Not of Ashcroft, but of the underground wing, the atrium. Each room marked. Circles, arrows, notes. Some rooms crossed out entirely. A passage marked with a red line that looped toward the far edge, labeled only as lower chamber. There's more, she whispered. He mapped out something deeper. Elliot leaned in, eyes scanning the map. I thought this was the only floor. It's not. A sudden sound echoed from the corridor. Not loud, but deliberate. Footsteps, then silence. They both froze. Ivy clicked off the flashlight, plunging them into dim emergency lighting. She moved to the door slowly, pressing her back against the frame and peeking into the hall. No one. But the light in the observation room was now off. Elliot took a cautious step forward. Colin, he called, voice barely above a whisper. No response, but then, from farther down the corridor, a door creaked open, slowly. A soft metallic groan that seemed to stretch out too long. They stood still, waiting. Then Ivy stepped forward, her voice steadier than she felt. If one of you is here, she said gently, we just want to understand. You don't have to hide. Silence. Then, from the shadows down the corridor, a voice, calm, male, steady. You shouldn't have come here, Ivy. Her breath caught. The voice was familiar. It was Colin. The corridor was still. Ivy took a step forward, heart pounding beneath the hush of fluorescent light. Colin's voice had come from the far end, near one of the sealed doors, R03, if she remembered correctly. His voice hadn't trembled. There was no fear in it, only certainty. Elliot looked to her for direction, but Ivy had already begun moving down the hallway. Each step echoed softly as she passed the rooms where 7 children had once lived in silence. Rooms that still remembered their names, even if the world didn't. She stopped just outside room 03. The door stood ajar. Inside, the shadows made everything look distorted. The walls bowed in slightly, the cot too narrow, the desk slightly off-center, as though space itself had sagged over the years. But the figure near the far wall was unmistakable. Colin Reeves, older but not unfamiliar. His face was leaner than she remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp, unreadable, always a few seconds ahead of the moment. His hair, once light brown, was darker now, and his posture was rigid, like a soldier who never unlearned stillness. He didn't flinch as she entered. "You got the letter," he said. "I did," she replied softly. "I didn't know who it was from." "I needed someone who wouldn't run," Colin said. "You stayed quiet when everyone else filled in the blanks." I remembered that. Behind her, Elliot stepped inside. Colin's gaze flickered to him but didn't linger. "You both came," he said. "That may complicate things." "What is this place really, Colin?" Ivy asked. "What happened to the others?" Colin's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. He turned and picked something up from the desk, a photograph, edges worn. He held it out to her. 7 children, sitting in a circle on the floor. They looked tired. Some smiled faintly. Others stared at the camera with a strange stillness, as if their expressions were borrowed. "That was us," Colin said. "About 3 months in." Ivy took the photo carefully. Her eyes scanned the faces. Rachel, Jonah, Elise, Tamson, Aaron, May, and Colin. All accounted for. "Where are they now?" she asked. Colin was quiet for a long moment before answering. Elise was the first to stop trusting the staff. She started writing on the walls, hiding messages in her art. I think she was trying to warn the others. Then one day, she wasn't in her room anymore. Ivy's voice barely came out. "What happened to her?" "They told us she graduated," Colin replied flatly. "They always said that when someone disappeared, that they'd moved on to phase 2, but we never saw them again." He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor now. Rachel resisted too. She kept trying to ask questions. They removed her speaking hours, then her writing privileges. She vanished 2 weeks later. Ivy sat down across from him. "So they were taken out, one by one?" "No," Colin said. "They weren't taken. They were changed." His gaze lifted. "After the 4th disappearance, Jonah, something shifted. The staff began letting us roam more freely. No schedules, no rules. They wanted to see what we would become when left to self-regulate. But it wasn't freedom. It was observation." Elliot leaned against the doorway. "Did you try to leave?" "They made us believe there was nothing to return to. They said the world had changed, that a virus had spread, that cities were gone. It was easier to believe the lie when you were alone." "But you came back," Ivy said. "You escaped." Colin nodded. "There's a tunnel, an emergency passage connected to the old utilities shed outside the West Wing. I found it 2 years ago when the lights began failing down here. It was always meant as an exit, but only for the staff." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "I left. I lived outside for a while, changed my name, tried to blend in. But I couldn't. I kept hearing their voices. I kept seeing their faces. And then I realized, what if some of them were still here?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "What if not all of them left?" Ivy leaned forward. "You think someone stayed?" Colin nodded slowly. "May? I think she never left. I think she's still down here, hiding, watching. She was always quiet, always drawn to the corners. If anyone could disappear inside this place without leaving, it would be her." Elliot crossed his arms. "We need to find her. If she's still here, we can't just walk away." "There's a lower chamber," Colin said. "We called it the underspace. It was off limits even to us. It's where they ran simulations, tested sensory control, memory. Other things. If May is here, she's there. He looked at Ivy. But the longer we stay, the more dangerous this becomes. Why? She asked. Colin's voice dropped again. Because the facility is waking up. Systems that were off are back online. Someone reconnected power last week. The doors are locking again. The security lights are blinking in sequence. This place wasn't just designed to observe. He looked toward the hallway. It was designed to hold. Ivy followed the map down the corridor, her flashlight beam sweeping over the floor as they passed the 7 doors once meant to house brilliance. Colin walked ahead, his steps purposeful, while Elliot lingered behind, eyes darting to shadows as if they might shift at any moment. The facility seemed colder now, as though the building itself had started breathing again, slow and mechanical. A faint hum pulsed from behind the walls, low enough to feel in the ribs, like a bass line threaded through concrete. They reached a service access panel at the far end of the atrium hallway. Colin crouched and pulled it open. Inside was a narrow maintenance passage, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Rusty rungs led down into darkness. "This takes us below the atrium," Colin said. "To the underspace." Ivy hesitated. "And Subject 9. Colin looked up at her, the flickering emergency light casting a strange shimmer over his face. Subject 9 wasn't part of the original 7, at least, not at first. He started down the ladder. The tunnel felt endless. Walls pressing close, the air sharp with copper and dust. At the bottom, they emerged into a narrow hall lined with mirrored panels and soundproof doors. Ivy noticed her reflection, drawn, pale, eyes wide with sleepless worry. Colin gestured to the end of the corridor, a door with no label, no number, no warning. "That's where they brought the late edition," he said. "Subject 9. Ivy stepped forward, hand on the door frame. "Who was it?" Colin's jaw tightened. "We never knew. They were kept separate from us. No name, just a voice we'd hear sometimes through the vents, crying, speaking things that didn't make sense." Elliot stepped closer, uneasy. "You said you saw something when you came back?" Colin nodded. "In the observation glass down here. A face I hadn't seen in decades. It didn't look like a child anymore, but it was familiar." He took a breath. "I think it was Tamson." Ivy turned sharply. "She was one of the 7. Yes," he said softly. "But I think they did something to her." The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside was a small room, bare walls, a single chair, and a mirror that covered an entire panel. On the far side of the mirror was another chamber. Ivy stepped forward, peering in. At first, it looked empty. Then she saw the figure. A woman, seated on the floor, legs crossed, eyes closed, pale skin under harsh white light. Her dark hair hung in a tangled curtain around her face, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of her breath. Ivy whispered, "Is that—" Colin stepped beside her. "Tamson was always the strongest," he said. "When the rules didn't make sense, she questioned them. When they punished her, she didn't flinch. They moved her into a separate space after that, said she was disrupting the experiment." Elliot leaned closer to the glass. "Why hasn't she left?" "I don't know," Colin said. "But she's awake now." As if cued by the words, Tamson's eyes opened. They were impossibly still. She rose slowly to her feet, turning to face the mirror, and looked directly at them. Not through the glass. At them. Ivy stepped back instinctively. Tamson's lips moved. Ivy couldn't hear the words, but she could read them. "I remember you." Then she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cruel. It was knowing. A soft clicking sound echoed behind them. Ivy spun toward the door, but it was already closing. Colin lunged, trying to stop it, but it sealed with a pressurized hiss. A red light blinked above the frame. They were locked in. And behind the mirror, Tamson turned and walked away into the shadows of her chamber. The red light above the door cast a soft pulse over the walls, like a heartbeat just slightly too slow. Ivy stepped away from it, pressing her palms to her temples. The room's silence felt thicker now, like it had swallowed the air and left only tension behind. "She recognized us," Elliot said. "I saw it in her eyes." Colin nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the mirror. She never forgot. That's why she stayed. Ivy turned toward him. "You said she was strong, that she pushed back. Why wouldn't she leave when she had the chance?" Colin's voice was quiet. "Because something about this place changed her." Elliot stepped to the side wall, fingers brushing against a control panel half hidden in the metal. The dust was disturbed. Someone had used it recently. "There's power," he muttered. "She could be controlling the facility, locking doors, moving between sections." "That's not just surviving," Ivy said slowly. "That's adapting." Colin finally tore his gaze from the mirror. "They kept her in isolation for months, maybe longer. We don't know what they told her, what they did. But the last time I saw her, before the graduation, she wasn't like the rest of us. She had stopped speaking, stopped reacting. She didn't even look at us. It was like she'd gone somewhere else, inside herself." Ivy knelt near the floor, studying the base of the locked door. There was no manual override, no vent large enough to crawl through. They were sealed in. "What now?" Elliot asked. "Wait for her to come back?" Colin hesitated. Then, "No. There's another way out. A backup access tunnel. The staff used it when they needed to move quietly. I saw it once. It's behind the observation glass." He walked to the far corner of the room and knelt, pushing at the wall where the mirror ended. A soft groan echoed as the panel shifted slightly. With a grunt, he pried it open. A crawl space. Narrow, dim, leading behind the mirror and into the network of utility corridors beyond. "You sure this leads somewhere?" Elliot asked, eyeing the tunnel with suspicion. "It leads out," Colin said. "Or it used to." The tunnel was tight, lit only by the faint glow of their flashlights. Pipes ran along the ceiling, some hissing faintly. Ivy crawled just behind Colin, Elliot following in silence. For several long minutes, there was nothing but the soft sound of knees on metal and their breathing. Then Ivy saw it. A small chamber, square, low-ceilinged, and empty. But etched into the walls in uneven handwriting were names. Rachel Jonah, Elise May, Aaron Tamson. Colin paused, brushing dust from the final name etched low to the floor. "Colin, they left these behind?" Elliot asked. "No," Ivy whispered. This is where they waited." Colin nodded. "We used to gather here when we could, in secret, away from the staff, from the cameras. We didn't speak much, just existed together. It was the only place that felt like ours." Ivy turned, examining the opposite wall, a faint outline of another door. Not metal, wood, old, with a small brass handle and no label. She opened it slowly. Beyond lay another corridor, this one more natural, carved through stone as if part of the original land the school was built on. The floor sloped downward, and in the distance, they heard something. A hum, not electric, not mechanical. A voice, faint, rising and falling in a pattern, almost like singing. Ivy stepped forward. "May." Colin nodded. She used to hum while painting. It helped her stay calm. She hated silence. They followed the sound. The chamber was wide, lit only by lanterns that burned without wires. A small mural covered one wall, made of soot, dust, and colored fragments. Faces, shapes, a house. A girl with closed eyes. A school with no windows. And in the center of the room sat a woman cross-legged, her back to them, humming softly. "May?" Ivy asked gently. The woman turned. Her face was pale, eyes deep-set but kind. She looked at them like someone waking from a long dream, neither startled nor afraid. "I thought you'd come," she said. "May," Colin breathed. "You're alive." May smiled faintly. "Not all of us are." Elliot stepped forward. "Where are the others?" She looked past him toward the mural. "Some left," she said. "Some broke. Some stayed like I did. But not here. In their own rooms, in their own minds." She pointed to a shape on the mural, a black spiral etched behind the school building. "That's where Tamson lives now. She built her own space, closed the doors. She thought we were better off inside." "Is she dangerous?" Ivy asked. May's expression flickered. Numbered just different. "She remembers too much. She built the new system. She controls the power now. Keeps the door locked until she's sure." "Sure of what?" Colin asked. May stood slowly, eyes focused on Ivy. "That it's safe." May led them through another passage, this one smoother, more refined than the others. The walls were lined with faded insulation and steel beams that hinted at a part of the facility once meant to be seen, maybe even toured, but it had long since been forgotten by everyone above ground. "She never really left," May said softly as they walked. Tamson stayed close to the center. The others drifted. Some couldn't keep their sense of time. Others forgot what they were before this place. Ivy kept her pace even, her flashlight held low. "And you?" May glanced at her, a strange calm in her expression. "I never forgot," she said. "I chose not to leave. Not because I couldn't, but because someone needed to remember all of it." They reached a sealed door made of reinforced glass. Through it, Ivy could see a vast, windowless room, lined with old desks, rusted filing cabinets, and walls covered in faded newspaper clippings and blueprints. May punched a code into a control panel. The door slid open with a slow sigh. "This was the control room," she said. "Not for us, for them, the observers." They stepped inside. The space smelled of dust and ozone, like a server room long since cooled. Screens covered one wall, blank now, but Ivy imagined they once flickered with feeds from every corner of the atrium. A thick binder sat open on the central desk, its pages stiff and yellowing. Ivy flipped it open carefully. At the top of the page, Project Verity, Phase 3, Immersive Isolation Study, and beneath it, a list of subjects: R01, Rachel B, R02, Jonah C, R03, Colin R, R04, Elise M, R05, Aaron T, R06, May L, R07, Tamson K, then R08, NA, placeholder R09, field approved exception, added by benefactor directive. Elliot leaned over her shoulder. Subject 9. Not part of the original study, Ivy murmured, but someone overrode the plan. May nodded. "We never knew who made that decision. Just that one day, Tamson stopped being one of us and became something else in their eyes. They moved her to a different part of the atrium, gave her more access, more freedom. Then they left." "Who's they?" Ivy asked. May pointed to a name printed near the bottom of the document. "Primary Fund Contributor, Dr. Adrian Whitmore." Colin's breath caught. "I remember that name," he said. "He visited once. Tall, gray suit. Said he was here to watch the future unfold." Ivy turned the page and found a faded photo clipped to the bottom. A man in his 60s, sharply dressed, stood in front of the atrium's main entrance. His face was sharp and pleasant, the kind that made people listen. Behind him, barely visible in the background, were the 7 children, smiling faintly, eyes turned to the camera like they had been instructed to. Elliot frowned. "He was never on staff." "No," May said. "He never stayed, but he had the power to open doors no one else could." Ivy stared at the man's face. There was something cold in it, even in stillness, a kind of detachment. "Why did he fund it?" she asked. May walked over to a nearby filing cabinet, pulled open the top drawer, and lifted a manila folder with trembling hands. She handed it to Ivy. Inside were letters, handwritten, neatly folded. Most were addressed to unnamed recipients, but one, older and more brittle than the rest, was marked clearly. To the Board of Ashcroft. Confidential Remodified Study Proposal, 1996. Ivy read aloud. "We are on the edge of something unprecedented. The traditional methods of education are antiquated. I believe that within isolation, controlled environment, and moral stripping, we can rebuild children into something more precise. A generation of thinkers unshaped by emotional clutter. They will be empty vessels we can fill with design. The world is fractured. But this is where we rebuild it. I have selected Subject 9 personally. She has what the others do not. Obedience through silence. Loyalty bred not from fear, but from loss. She is the key. Dr. Adrian Whitmore." The room went still. Ivy closed the folder. "Tamson." Colin sat heavily on a nearby chair, his voice hollow. "He built this entire place around her." May sat beside him. She didn't know at first. None of us did, but eventually, she figured it out. She saw how they watched her, how they listened to her more than us. They told her she was special, that she would outlast the others. They called her Subject 9 long before we even realized what that meant. Elliot rubbed his temple. "She became the experiment." "No," Ivy said quietly. "She became its architect." When they left, when the funding ran out and the observers vanished, she didn't collapse. She adapted, took control of what was left, and she's been down here ever since. The lights above flickered. May stood slowly, eyes alert. "She knows we're here," she said. "She's watching now." Ivy looked at the blank screens, suddenly unsure if they were truly off. "What will she do?" May met her gaze. "She's waiting to see if we're part of the old world, or if we're different." The hallway back toward the atrium was quieter now, like the air itself had gone still to listen. They walked in silence, each of them turning inward, haunted by the same thought. Tamson wasn't just a survivor. She had become the final gatekeeper of the experiment, the last extension of a program that had long since crumbled above ground, but still thrived in the shadows beneath it. The control room door had sealed behind them when they left. May didn't seem surprised. "She's giving us a path," she said, "but it's not open forever." The tunnel they entered was colder than the rest. Not because of airflow, but because it had never been meant for human passage. It was raw and unpainted, barely lit by slivers of light filtering through cracks in the walls. Pipes ran along the ceiling, some dripping water in slow, rhythmic beats that echoed like footsteps. At the end of the passage was a steel door, taller than the others, seamless except for a biometric scanner dimly glowing red. "She still uses the system," Colin said, stepping forward. "This was locked the last time I came." May nodded. "She only opens it if she wants to speak." Ivy stepped to the side, heart racing. As if on cue, the light on the scanner turned green. With a low hiss, the door began to open. The room beyond was unlike anything they'd seen. A vast dome, built with curved panels and illuminated by a faint bluish light that seemed to come from beneath the floor. The ceiling stretched high, dotted with vents and small cameras mounted like unblinking eyes. Along the walls were artifacts, drawings, letters, broken toys, journals. A museum of memory, curated by someone who never left. In the center stood Tamson. She wore a long, simple gray tunic. Her posture was poised, regal, like a statue placed exactly where it was meant to be. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her face calm. She looked up as they entered. "I've been waiting," she said. Her voice hadn't changed. Still soft, still clipped. like every syllable was measured before release. May was the first to approach. "Tamson," she whispered. Tamson offered a faint smile. "You stayed." "I had to." Colin took a cautious step forward. "Why are you still here?" Tamson tilted her head. "Why are you?" No one answered. Ivy stepped into the dome, her gaze drifting across the relics on the walls. "You've kept everything," she said. "They left it behind," Tamson replied. "I didn't want it to be lost." Ivy nodded. "But you locked the doors." "I had to," Tamson said quietly. "People leave when you open them, and sometimes they forget what they left behind." "You could have left too," Elliot said. Tamson looked at him gently. "And go where? This place made me. Out there, I'd only be what people thought I should be. Here, I know who I am." "You're not a test," Ivy said. Tamson's eyes sharpened. "Number, I'm the result." The silence stretched. Then Ivy stepped forward again. "Tamson, the others, Elise, Rachel, Jonah." "They're gone," Tamson said softly. "In different ways. Some physically, some faded." "And what about you?" Ivy asked. "What are you still holding on to?" Tamson turned slowly. Her voice cracked just once. "They made us believe we were chosen because we were special, but we weren't chosen for our strengths. We were chosen for our silences, our weaknesses. They didn't want brilliance. They wanted obedience." She touched one of the glass cases near the wall, a small bracelet, once worn by Rachel. "I stayed to guard what they couldn't destroy," she said. "To protect our names, our truths. If I had left, it would have all vanished." Colin's voice was quiet. "You were just a child." Tamson looked up. "And now I'm not." There was a pause, then the low, whirring sound of the door behind them, powering down. May turned. "What are you doing?" "I opened the door for a reason," Tamson said, "so someone else could choose to carry the story." Ivy stepped forward. "What do you mean?" Tamson looked at her directly. "I'm not leaving, but one of you can." The dome darkened, and a second door, one Ivy hadn't noticed before, slid open behind a panel at the far side of the chamber. Soft, natural light spilled through. Daylight. A way out. May whispered, "It's the original service exit." Tamson nodded. "It leads to the hills behind the school. I used it once, long ago. Then I closed it." Ivy turned to her. "Why open it now?" Tamson met her eyes. "Because it's time someone told the truth." The early evening light drifted through the narrow exit corridor like a long-forgotten memory. Warm. Silent. Real. Ivy stood at the threshold, her eyes adjusting after so many hours in fluorescent cold. The scent of pine and soil floated in, grounding her like a hand pressed gently to her back. Behind her, the door to the dome remained open. Tamson stood just within, watching. "You can all leave," she said, voice steady. "But not all of us need to." Colin stepped forward, torn. "You don't have to stay." "I do," Tamson replied. "This place was built to keep us contained. I've turned it into something else, something that remembers." May stood at her side. "Then I'll stay too." Ivy turned. "Are you sure?" May smiled faintly. "I've had peace here, more than I ever did outside. I don't want the world's noise again, but I want you to carry the truth." Elliot exhaled slowly. "So do I." They all looked to Ivy. She held the manila folder in her hands, the documents, the letters, the records of everything the public never saw. She thought of the 7 names carved in the tunnel wall, of the scrawled journal entries, of the red lettering above the observation room. We were promised brilliance, but they only gave us silence. Now, someone could give them voice. She stepped through the threshold and turned back. "Will the door stay open?" Tamson paused, then nodded. "It will now." Ivy took one last look at the dome, the walls covered in names and broken memories, the lives that had been reshaped in quiet, and nodded once. Then she climbed. 6 months later, the story broke quietly at first. A retired journalist with ties to Ashcroft uncovered lost educational documents. A local paper published an exposé about Project Verity. Then a major outlet followed. Soon after, the name Dr. Adrian Whitmore reappeared in headlines for the first time in decades. A government inquiry was launched, the school's hidden funding was traced, and Ivy Reynolds, previously unknown, became the voice of the forgotten. She didn't share everything, not where the facility was, not how to find it, but she shared what mattered, the truth. 1 year later, Ashcroft Ridge, North Hollow, the trees had begun reclaiming the hillside. Wildflowers bloomed between the cracks of what once was a service road. The entrance was now hidden by moss and brush, but if you stood in just the right spot, you could still see the faint outline of the original school crest carved into stone. Veritas. Disciplina. Silence. The silence had ended. Ivy stood at the ridge alone, watching the wind shift through the trees. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Somewhere behind the trees, beyond the hidden door, they were still there. Not imprisoned, not forgotten, living, remembering, carrying forward. She slipped a small folded photo from her coat pocket, an old yearbook page now restored. All 7 faces intact. Tamson, May, Colin, Rachel, Jonah, Aaron, Elise. She smiled and whispered their names, then turned back toward the path and let the truth walk beside her.